Imagine this for a moment. You wake up to the sound of birds outside your window, the sunlight gently warming your face, and the world outside buzzing with life. For you, it feels like any other morning. A morning filled with simple routines, quiet comfort, and small unspoken dreams. But in the span of a single conversation, everything you know, everything you hope for, everything you believe your future will be shatters into pieces. That was the morning for Aisha. She was only 20, a girl who still carried the softness of youth in her heart, yet the fire of ambition in her eyes. She wanted to study further, travel the world, perhaps even become a teacher. She dreamed of walking her own path, writing her own story, and one day falling in love, on her own terms. But that morning was different. Aisha noticed at the moment she stepped into the living room. Her parents sat there quietly, faces serious, whispers falling into silence the second she walked in. Normally, her home was filled with laughter, with the comforting hum of daily chatter. But today, it was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that warns you of a storm about to break. "Sit down, Aisha," her father said. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made her stomach twist. Confused, she sat. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Her mother avoided her eyes, staring down at the carpet as if it suddenly held all the secrets of the world. Her father cleared his throat and spoke the words that would change her life forever. "We've made a decision. You're going to get married." For a moment, Aisha thought she misheard. Married? She blinked, her heart skipping a beat, her mind struggling to process. "To whom?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Her father sighed. "To a good man. His name is Kamal. He is respectable, trustworthy, and comes from a decent family. We've already agreed. The wedding will be soon." The words fell on her like stones. Her heart sank, heavy and unmovable, crushing her breath. She had never met Kamal. She didn't even know what he looked like, what he liked, or how he lived. And yet, her parents were asking her, no, telling her, to give her life to him, to become his wife, his partner, his companion, without love, without choice, without consent. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the world around her. "Baba, Mama, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not ready. I don't even know him. How can you expect me to marry a stranger?" Her mother shifted uncomfortably, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Aisha, you're not a child anymore. This is what's best for you. Marriage is security. A husband is protection. Kamal will take care of you." But Aisha didn't want security without love. She didn't want protection if it meant losing her freedom. She wanted to finish her studies, to choose her partner when her heart told her the time was right. "Please, Baba," she begged again, her tears now flowing freely. "Give me time. Let me finish my studies. I don't want this yet. I want to live my life first." Her father's face hardened, his voice final. "Enough, Aisha. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's right for you. We've made our decision. You will marry him." And just like that, her world collapsed. She ran to her room, shut the door, and buried her face in her pillow, sobbing until her chest ached. Her dreams, her freedom, her future. It all felt like it was slipping through her fingers, stolen before she could even hold it. She screamed into her pillow, the sound muffled but raw, a cry that no one else in the house cared to hear. The walls of her room, once filled with posters of books and inspiring quotes, now felt like prison bars closing around her. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, her tear-streaked face, her red eyes, her trembling lips, and she barely recognized herself. "This isn't fair," she whispered to the girl in the mirror. "This isn't my choice. This isn't my life." That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. What if Kamal was cruel? What if he treated her badly? What if she lost herself completely in a life she never wanted? But above all, one question haunted her. Why didn't anyone care about what I wanted? The following days were worse. Relatives came over, congratulating her as if she had won some great prize. They hugged her, smiled, and whispered blessings. "You're so lucky, Aisha," they said. "Kamal is a good man." Lucky? She wanted to scream. She didn't feel lucky. She felt like a bird with clipped wings, forced into a cage decorated with flowers. Her friends tried to cheer her up, but even they couldn't understand. "Maybe it won't be so bad," one said gently. "Maybe he'll treat you well." But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about maybe. It was about choice. It was about freedom. It was about her right to decide what her life should look like. And now, that right was gone. One afternoon, as she sat quietly in her room, her mother came in. She placed a gentle hand on Aisha's shoulder and whispered, "I know this is hard, my daughter, but trust us. We would never put you in harm's way." Aisha looked up at her mother, her eyes swollen from crying. "Then why does it feel like you are?" Her mother had no answer. That was the moment Aisha realized she was truly alone in this fight. Her family had already chosen her fate. Her voice, her tears, her resistance. It all meant nothing against the weight of tradition and expectations. The wedding preparations began almost immediately. Dresses were chosen. A hall was booked. Invitations were sent. Aisha watched it all happen, as if she were watching someone else's life. People fussed over her, fixing her hair, adjusting her clothes, planning her big day. But inside, she was breaking apart piece by piece. Every night she prayed for a miracle, for something to stop this marriage, for someone to listen to her heart. But no miracle came. And so, as the wedding day approached, Aisha stood on the edge of a life she didn't choose, staring into a future she didn't want, her heart heavy with sorrow, her spirit drenched in fear. The shocking day had arrived, the day when everything she dreamed was stolen, replaced with reality she could never escape. And little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her strength, her patience, and her heart in ways she never imagined. The house felt different after the announcement. It was as though every wall had heard the verdict. Every corner whispered the same sentence. Aisha is to be married to a stranger. She wandered back to her room, her footsteps slow and heavy. The very air seemed thick, pressing against her chest, stealing her breath. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling in her lap, and tried to replay the words her father had spoken. But no matter how many times she repeated them in her mind, they didn't soften, they didn't change. They were sharp, final. Her heart thudded painfully as reality sank in. This isn't a nightmare. This is real. The tears came again, rolling hot down her cheeks, dripping onto her dress. "Why me?" she whispered to the silence of her room. "Why now?" For years, Aisha had worked hard at her studies. She was always at the top of her class, always the one her teachers praised. She wanted to be more than just a daughter, more than just someone's wife. She wanted to stand tall on her own, to carve her name into the world. And now, her parents had signed her future away with a single decision. Later that evening, she sat at the dinner table. The food smelled delicious: spiced rice, chicken curry, warm bread fresh from the oven. Normally, she would eat happily, laughing with her younger brother, teasing her sister. But tonight, every bite turned to sand in her mouth. She barely touched her plate. Her father noticed. "Why aren't you eating, Aisha? You'll need your strength. There's a lot of preparation to be done." She dropped her spoon with a clang, unable to hold back anymore. "How can I eat when my life is being stolen from me?" She burst out. Her father's eyes darkened. "Stolen? Don't speak like that. We are doing what's best for you." Her voice cracked with anger and despair. "Best for me? Or best for you? Do you even care what I want? Did you even ask me before making this decision?" Her mother put a hand on her arm, trying to calm her, but Aisha pulled away. "I had dreams, Mama. I wanted to finish my studies. I wanted to find someone I love. You're taking that away from me." Her father's voice rose, heavy with authority. "Enough, Aisha. This family has always followed tradition. You are not the first girl to marry by arrangement, and you will not be the last. Your mother married me the same way, and look, we have a family, we have respect, we have stability. You will learn to love him. That is how it works." But Aisha shook her head violently. "That's not how it works for me. I don't want to learn to love someone. I want to choose someone to love." Her father slammed his hand on the table, making the plates rattle. You speak like a child. You think life is about fairy tales and choices? Life is about sacrifice. It is about duty. And right now, your duty is to marry Kamal." Her tears fell harder, her body trembling from the force of her emotions. She turned to her mother, searching her eyes for softness, for hope. "Mama, please. You always told me to follow my heart. Why won't you listen to it now?" Her mother's lips quivered, her eyes glassy with unspoken sorrow. But she remained silent, trapped between her love for her daughter and her loyalty to her husband. And in that silence, Aisha found her answer. Her mother would not fight for her. That night, Aisha locked herself in her room again. She sat by the window, staring at the moon, her chest heavy with despair. The world outside carried on as if nothing had changed. Children laughed in the distance. Neighbors talked loudly in the street. The wind rustled through the trees. But for her, everything had changed. "They don't see me," she thought bitterly. "They only see a daughter, a responsibility, a piece of property to be handed from one house to another." Her pillow was soaked with tears by the time she finally fell asleep, her body exhausted from crying. The following days were a blur of pain. Her aunts came over, smiling broadly, praising her parents for arranging such a good match. "Kamal is a respectable man," they said. "You should be proud, Aisha. Not every girl gets such a chance." A chance? She wanted to laugh. How could they call it a chance when it was a chain? They showed her fabrics for her wedding dress, sparkling jewelry, plans for the ceremony. They spoke of the food, the guests, the music. Everyone seemed excited. Everyone except her. Inside, she was screaming. She tried, one last time, to reason with her father. She stood in his study, her hands clenched tightly, her voice trembling but determined. "Baba, I'm begging you. Don't do this to me. Give me time. Let me finish school. Let me live first. I'm not ready." Her father didn't look up from his papers. "The decision is made. Don't shame us by resisting. Do you want people to think you are disobedient? Do you want gossip to destroy our family's name?" Her voice cracked. "What about me? What about my name? My life? Don't I matter at all?" Finally, he looked up. His eyes were stern, unyielding. "You will marry him, Aisha. That is final." And with that, the last thread of hope inside her snapped. From that moment on, she felt like a ghost drifting through her own home. She stopped laughing with her siblings. She stopped singing to herself in the mornings. She stopped dreaming. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Every whisper of relatives, every congratulation, every plan for the wedding. It was like salt rubbed into a wound that refused to heal. And yet, no one saw her pain. No one listened to her silent screams. Aisha would sit for hours at her window, staring at the horizon. She thought of running away, of disappearing, of escaping to a place where no one could find her. But where would she go? How would she survive? She was trapped, not just by her family's decision, but by the invisible chains of tradition, expectation, and duty. The painful news had been delivered. The verdict had been set. And though she fought with tears, with words, with every piece of her heart, her cries fell on deaf ears. Her future was no longer hers. And as the wedding day drew closer, Aisha realized the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes, the ones who love us most are the very ones who break us. The days slipped by like sand through Aisha's trembling fingers, each one dragging her closer to the moment she dreaded most. The house was buzzing with activity. Seamstresses coming and going, relatives flooding in with gifts and advice, the aroma of sweets being prepared in the kitchen. To the outside world, it was a celebration. But for Aisha, it felt like the slow march toward her own execution. She avoided the laughter of her cousins, the teasing of her aunts, the cheerful songs being rehearsed for the ceremony. Every sound pierced her heart, a cruel reminder that this happiness was built on her pain. One morning, her mother brought in the bridal dress. It was breathtaking, embroidered with gold, shimmering under the light, a dress every bride would dream of wearing. Everyone gasped at its beauty, but when Aisha looked at it, her stomach twisted. To her, it wasn't a dress. It was a cage. a costume designed to make her look like she belonged in a story she didn't want to be part of. Her mother held it up proudly. "Look, Aisha, isn't it beautiful?" Aisha forced a nod, but inside she wanted to scream, "No, it's not beautiful, it's suffocating me." The day she tried it on, the relatives clapped and cried, praising her beauty. "Mashallah, you look like a princess," they said. But when Aisha looked in the mirror, she didn't see a princess. She saw a prisoner dressed for display. The night before the wedding was the heaviest of all. Tradition dictated that she stay in her room, friends and cousins singing songs, painting her hands with henna. They giggled, told her jokes, and whispered about her new life. But Aisha barely spoke. She smiled when they looked at her, but the smile never reached her eyes. When the last guest left and silence returned, she sat by her window again, staring at the stars. She whispered a prayer into the night. "God, if you're listening, please don't let this happen. Please send me a way out." But the stars twinkled silently back at her, offering no answers. She cried herself to sleep that night, her henna-stained hands pressed against her wet cheeks. The morning arrived far too quickly. The house was alive with music, chatter, and footsteps. Relatives swarmed around her, fixing her hair, adjusting her veil, painting her lips. They told her she looked radiant, that she was the luckiest girl alive. But inside, her heart was pounding, screaming, "I don't want this. I don't want this." When she was finally ready, she was let out of her room like a doll, her body decorated, her steps small and hesitant. Every eye turned toward her. Every camera captured her. Every voice cheered. Yet she felt utterly invisible, because no one saw the storm raging inside her chest. The wedding hall was breathtaking. Flowers cascading from every corner, golden lights twinkling like stars, tables filled with delicious food. Guests laughed, music filled the air, children ran around excitedly. It looked like a scene from a fairy tale. But for Aisha, every detail was a dagger. As she sat on the decorated stage, beside the man she hardly knew, she kept her gaze lowered. She could feel Kamal sitting next to her, calm and silent. But she didn't dare look at him. Not because she hated him, but because she couldn't bear to face the reality of what was happening. The religious leader recited the vows. The guests hushed. The moment had come. "Aisha," he asked gently, "do you accept this marriage?" Her throat tightened. For a second, she thought of saying no. For a second, she imagined standing up, tearing off her veil, running out of the hall, and never looking back. Her heart screamed at her to resist. But then her father's eyes locked on hers, stern, unyielding, filled with unspoken warning. Her mother's anxious face pleaded with her silently not to cause a scene. And so, with tears burning in her eyes, Aisha whispered the word that sealed her fate. "Yes." The hall erupted in cheers. People clapped, smiled, hugged each other. Music burst forth, drums beating, songs rising. The air was alive with joy. But Aisha's heart was breaking into 1,000 silent pieces. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She was paraded before relatives, congratulated endlessly, photographed again and again. People told her she looked stunning, that her husband was lucky, that she was blessed. Blessed? She felt cursed. Her cheeks ached from forcing smiles. Her head spun from the noise. Her heart ached from the weight of it all. She felt like a guest at her own funeral, smiling while her soul was being buried. At one point, her best friend, Zara, managed to get close to her. She leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay?" Aisha's eyes brimmed with tears, but she forced herself to nod. What else could she do? She couldn't ruin the night, not when everyone else was so happy. When the time came to leave her family home, the weight of the moment nearly crushed her. She hugged her mother, sobbing uncontrollably, clinging to her as though letting go would mean losing herself forever. Her mother stroked her hair, tears streaming down her own cheeks, whispering, "Be strong, my daughter. Be patient. You'll be okay." But Aisha didn't believe her. She wasn't strong. She wasn't okay. She was terrified. Her father hugged her briefly, stiffly, then stepped back quickly, as though emotions were weakness. "Make us proud," he said firmly. Her siblings cried as they waved goodbye, their small hands clutching at her dress until relatives pulled them away. And then, with her heart breaking, Aisha was led into the car beside Kamal, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. The ride to Kamal's house was silent. The car was decorated with flowers. People honked in celebration, but inside, the silence was suffocating. Aisha stared out of the window, her tears falling quietly, watching her childhood home grow smaller in the distance until it disappeared altogether. Kamal glanced at her once, his face unreadable, but he said nothing, and in that silence, Aisha felt the weight of her new reality settle on her shoulders. She was no longer her father's daughter, no longer her own person. She was someone's wife now, a stranger's wife. When they arrived at Kamal's home, the door was decorated with flowers, lights twinkling warmly. His family welcomed her with smiles and cheers, showering her with blessings. But as she stepped across the threshold, she felt like she was crossing into another world, a world she didn't choose, a world she didn't understand, a world she couldn't escape. Her heart whispered one last desperate thought. Maybe this is where my story ends. But what Aisha didn't know was that her story was only just beginning. The car ride had felt endless, but when it finally stopped, Aisha's heart beat so loudly she thought the whole world could hear it. She sat frozen for a moment, staring at the grand doorway decorated with flowers and golden lights. Music played faintly in the background as neighbors gathered to watch the arrival of the new bride. Her hands shook in her lap. She wasn't ready to step out, but the door opened and everyone was waiting. With trembling legs, she forced herself to move. She stepped out of the car, her heavy dress rustling, her veil slipping slightly over her tear-streaked face. People cheered, clapped, and showered petals. But inside, she felt hollow. Kamal's family welcomed her warmly. His mother kissed her forehead and whispered blessings. His sisters held her hands and guided her toward the house. Laughter and music filled the air. Yet to Aisha, it all sounded distant, muffled like echoes in a tunnel. The house itself was beautiful, large, filled with light, walls painted in warm tones, every corner decorated for the occasion. Yet to Aisha it felt cold, strange, foreign. She had grown up in a modest home, where every corner carried a memory. Her father's chair, her mother's cooking, her siblings' laughter. But here, every wall was unfamiliar, every room a mystery. And then it struck her, this was supposed to be her new home. Her chest tightened. The word home felt wrong. This wasn't home. It was a place where she had been brought against her will, a place where she was expected to live, to smile, to belong. As tradition dictated, small rituals were performed. Aisha was led inside with her right foot first. She tipped over a small pot of rice at the threshold, symbolizing prosperity. She was asked to dip her hands in red dye and press them on the wall, leaving prints, a sign that the bride had entered her new family. Everyone clapped and cheered as she completed each step, but her heart wasn't in it. With every ritual, she felt like she was sinking deeper into a life she hadn't chosen. The celebrations went on for hours, family members eating, singing, talking loudly. But eventually, the crowd faded, the music stopped, and the house grew quiet. Too quiet. Aisha sat in her new room, a large space with a big bed, heavy curtains, and a dressing table decorated with flowers. It was beautiful, yet it felt like a cage. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, her eyes darting around. This wasn't her room. These weren't her things. She felt like a guest who didn't know when to leave. The silence pressed against her ears. She had always thought silence meant peace, but tonight it meant fear. The door creaked open. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. Kamal stepped inside. She had barely looked at him during the wedding. Now, under the dim light of the room, she finally saw him clearly. He was tall, with calm eyes, and an expression that seemed unreadable. Her body stiffened. Her heart raced. She didn't know what to expect. Would he speak kindly? Would he demand his rights as a husband? Would he try to break down the walls she had built around herself? For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Kamal broke it. His voice was calm, gentle. "You must be tired. This has been a long day. Aisha didn't answer. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. He didn't push. Instead, he walked to the window, drew the curtains halfway, and then turned back to her. "I know this is difficult for you," he said softly. "I won't pretend to know exactly how you feel, but I just want you to know this is your home now. You don't need to be afraid." His words surprised her. She had braced herself for harshness, for demands, for a stranger imposing his will on her. Instead, he had spoken gently, but the fear inside her was too strong to vanish with a few kind words. Her hands trembled. She lowered her eyes, unable to look at him directly. In her heart, she thought, this is what they all say in the beginning. How long before he shows his true colors? How long before the cage locks completely? So she stayed quiet. Kamal didn't press her. He walked over to the dressing table, removed his wedding garland, and placed it gently on the surface. Then, without another word, he sat down on the sofa across the room, giving her space. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't sharp. It was softer, almost like a fragile truce. When he finally fell asleep on the sofa, Aisha lay on the bed, her eyes wide open. She stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into her pillow. This was her life now. Her parents were gone. Her siblings were far away. The laughter of her childhood home was a memory. And here she was, lying in a stranger's house, in a stranger's room, with a stranger who was now her husband. She felt lonelier than ever before. The silence of the house swallowed her whole, and in that silence, she realized something heartbreaking. Her life no longer belonged to her. The next few days were a blur of awkwardness. Kamal's family tried to welcome her warmly. His mother would bring her food. His sisters would sit with her and chat. They treated her kindly, but still, Aisha felt out of place. Their laughter didn't reach her. Their words didn't comfort her. Every time she walked through the halls of the house, she felt like an intruder. The photos on the walls were of people she didn't know. The smells in the kitchen were different from what she had grown up with. Even the air felt strange. And through it all, the silence between her and Kamal remained. He was polite, respectful, but distant. He gave her space, never forcing conversation. Yet his quiet presence only deepened her unease. One evening, she stood before the large mirror in her room. She stared at her reflection, the bridal jewelry still hanging heavy on her neck, the gold bangles clinking softly as she raised her hand. She hardly recognized herself. "Who are you?" she whispered to the girl in the mirror. What happened to the Aisha who had dreams? Where did she go? Her reflection gave no answer, only stared back at her with tired eyes. That night, she realized something chilling. She felt invisible not only to others, but to herself. One night, as she sat quietly in the corner of the room, Kamal finally spoke again. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said softly. "I won't hurt you. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to feel safe here." Aisha blinked, startled by the sincerity in his tone. She wanted to believe him, but her fear wrapped around her like chains. Still, for the first time since the wedding, she whispered a reply. "I don't feel safe anywhere." Her voice was so faint it was almost a breath, but Kamal heard it. He didn't argue, didn't scold. He only nodded slowly and said, "Then I will wait until you do." That night, as she lay awake once again, Aisha thought about his words. For the first time, she felt a small flicker, tiny, fragile, but undeniable. Maybe this silence wouldn't last forever. Maybe one day she would feel safe again. But for now, the silence remained. Heavy, unfamiliar, a reminder that she was trapped in a house that didn't feel like hers, with a man she didn't know, living a life she hadn't chosen. And yet, hidden within that silence, something was slowly stirring, a seed of possibility that neither she nor Kamal fully understood yet. For days after the wedding, Aisha lived in the shadows of her new home. She moved quietly, spoke only when spoken to, and spent most of her time alone in a room that still didn't feel like hers. The silence that had wrapped around her heart since the day of the wedding clung to her like a second skin. She expected it, that eventually Kamal would show his true colors. Maybe he would scold her for being distant. Maybe he would demand that she fulfill her duties as a wife. Maybe he would reveal the selfishness she had always feared. But that moment never came. On her first morning in his house, Aisha woke to the sound of soft knocking. She froze, her heart leaping in her chest. Was it him? When she opened the door cautiously, she found a tray of breakfast waiting outside, warm tea, bread, and fruit. She looked around, but no one was there, just the tray left silently. She carried it inside, her hands trembling. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the food, her heart heavy with confusion. Who had brought it? His mother? His sisters? Or him? Later that day, she found out it had been Kamal. "You didn't eat much at the wedding," he said casually when their paths crossed in the hallway. "I thought you might be hungry." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. She only managed a small nod before hurrying away. In the evenings, she would sit quietly by the window, staring at the world outside, lost in thought. She knew he noticed, but he never disturbed her. He never demanded she speak, never forced himself into her silence. Instead, he kept his distance, reading on the sofa, working quietly on his laptop, sometimes stepping outside for long walks. It puzzled her. She had heard so many stories from other girls of arranged marriages where the husband asserted control immediately, where the wife's comfort didn't matter, where kindness was rare. She had prepared herself for the same. But Kamal was different. Days passed, and Aisha began to notice the little things. When she entered a room, he would stand slightly aside, as though giving her space. When meals were served, he always made sure she had food on her plate before taking any for himself. When relatives came over, he never pressured her to act cheerful. He let her be quiet. One evening, his younger cousin teased, "Your bride is so shy, Kamal. She barely speaks." Aisha's face flushed with embarrassment, but Kamal responded calmly, "She'll speak when she feels comfortable. Don't rush her." The words stunned her. He wasn't embarrassed by her silence. He wasn't angry. He defended her, protected her dignity. That night, as she lay awake, those words echoed in her mind. She'll speak when she feels comfortable. It was the first time someone had acknowledged her feelings without judgment. Despite herself, Aisha began to notice him more. The way he treated the household staff with respect. The way he spoke gently to his younger siblings. The way he never raised his voice, even when something went wrong. There was a steadiness in him, a calmness she hadn't expected. And slowly, very slowly, her fear began to crack. Not vanish, but shift. The cage around her heart loosened, even if just a little. One evening, after days of silence, she found herself sitting at the dining table opposite him. His family had eaten earlier, leaving the two of them alone. He broke the silence first. "I know this marriage wasn't what you wanted," he said, his tone gentle, almost cautious. Her fork froze halfway to her lips. She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. He continued, "I don't expect you to pretend. I don't expect you to suddenly accept me. But I want you to know I will never force you. Not your words, not your time, not your life. You don't owe me anything you're not ready to give." Tears stung her eyes. She looked down at her plate, blinking rapidly. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not her parents, not her relatives, no one. For the first time, she whispered, "Why?" Kamal tilted his head slightly, confused. "Why what? Why are you being kind?" Her voice cracked on the last word, as though kindness was harder to believe in than cruelty. He smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile. "Because marriage should never be a cage. It should be a choice. And since you didn't get that choice, the least I can do is give you freedom here." Her heart thudded. She didn't reply. But that night, as she lay in bed, his words wrapped around her like a fragile blanket of comfort. A week later, Aisha fell ill. It started with a fever, then body aches that left her weak and unable to get out of bed. She thought she would be left alone, that no one would notice, that she'd have to endure quietly. But to her surprise, Kamal was the first to knock gently on her door. When she didn't answer, he entered cautiously, holding a bowl of soup. "You need to eat," he said softly. She tried to protest. "I'm fine." Her voice was hoarse, her cheeks flushed with fever. but he placed the bowl on the table and sat on the edge of the sofa. "You're not fine. Let me help." That night, he checked on her every hour. He placed a damp cloth on her forehead, brought her water, made sure she took her medicine. He didn't leave her side until the fever broke in the early hours of the morning. As she drifted in and out of sleep, she saw him sitting quietly in the chair beside her bed, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but refusing to leave. And in her fevered haze, a single thought crossed her mind. This stranger cares more for me than anyone else has in a long time. When she finally recovered, she stepped out of her room one morning and found him in the kitchen making tea. "Good morning," he said with a small smile. For the first time since her marriage, Aisha's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was shy, hesitant, but real. That tiny smile changed something between them. It wasn't a wall collapsing, but it was the first brick removed. From then on, Aisha began noticing every detail more vividly. The way he carried himself with quiet dignity, the way he respected her silence, the way he was patient even when she was distant. Each act of kindness, each gentle word, was like water dripping slowly onto dry soil. And though she fought it, though she told herself she shouldn't, she began to soften. Her heart, once locked away in fear, began to stir. One night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she whispered to herself, maybe he isn't my enemy." It was a simple thought, but for Aisha, it was a revolution. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that this marriage might not be the prison she thought it was. Perhaps this stranger wasn't a monster in disguise. Perhaps, in his quiet way, he would show her something she had never known before: gentleness, respect, patience. And though she didn't say it out loud, deep inside her heart, she felt the first fragile thread of gratitude. Aisha had lived in fear and resistance for so long that she almost didn't recognize the strange new feeling taking root inside her. It was small at first, so fragile she could have ignored it. But as the days turned into weeks, the feeling grew stronger, whispering in her heart. It was hope. One afternoon, when the air was warm and golden, Kamal's younger sister invited Aisha to join them in the garden. Hesitant but unwilling to appear rude, she followed. The garden was full of life, bright flowers swaying in the breeze, birds darting from tree to tree, sunlight filtering through leaves like blessings from above. Kamal was already there, trimming a rose bush. He looked up when she arrived, gave her a gentle nod, then continued working silently. There was no demand for her attention, no pressure to speak, just quiet acceptance of her presence. For the first time, Aisha didn't feel like an outsider in this house. She sat on the stone bench, watching as her sister chatted cheerfully and Kamal worked patiently, occasionally asking his sister to hand him tools. At one point, he cut a fresh rose and placed it on the bench near Aisha without a word, then returned to his task. Her heart skipped a beat. He hadn't given it to her directly. He knew she wasn't ready, but he left it close enough for her to accept if she wished. Later, when no one was watching, she picked up the rose and held it against her chest, the faint fragrance filling her with an unfamiliar warmth. Kamal rarely spoke about himself, but Aisha began to notice details. He loved books. His shelves were lined with novels, histories, and poetry. He often spent evenings reading, a quiet lamp glowing beside him. One evening, as she walked past the sitting room, she heard him reciting softly from a book of poetry. His voice was steady, deep, filled with emotion he didn't usually show. She paused, hidden in the hallway, listening. The verses spoke of longing, of patience, of love that waits without demand. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the words mirrored her own heart. She didn't step inside, didn't let him know she was listening. But that night, she dreamed not of cages or walls, but of a gentle hand reaching out, waiting for her to take it. A few days later, his family decided to visit the local market. It was tradition for newlyweds to appear together, and though Aisha's heart pounded with anxiety, she agreed. The streets were alive with color and noise, vendors calling out, children laughing, spices scenting the air. Aisha stayed close to Kamal, her hands clutching her shawl nervously. At one point, the crowd grew thicker, pushing from every side. Aisha stumbled slightly, panic flashing in her eyes. Before she could fall, Kamal's hand steadied her gently. "Don't worry," he said softly, leaning just close enough for her to hear. "I'm here." For a brief moment, she felt safe, not trapped, not owned, safe. She didn't pull her hand away immediately. Instead, she let it linger in his for a few steps before withdrawing shyly. But in her heart, she carried a memory of that steady grip, the reassurance of someone who wouldn't let her fall. That evening, something unexpected happened. For the first time, Aisha cooked a small meal by herself. She had been raised with skills in the kitchen, but here, in this new home, she had avoided it, too unsure of her place. But now, with courage rising in her chest, she prepared a simple dish of rice and vegetables. She set it quietly on the dining table, not expecting anything. When Kamal walked in, he looked surprised. "You cooked this?" She nodded silently, her eyes fixed on the table. He took a bite, then smiled warmly. "It's delicious." The sincerity in his voice startled her. He wasn't flattering her out of obligation. He meant it. Something bloomed inside her chest. Pride, a small, delicate joy. For the first time since her marriage, she felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was contributing, creating, sharing. That night, she ate beside him without the heavy weight of dread. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was the closest she had come. One evening, as they sat in the quiet living room, Kamal closed his book and looked at her. His gaze was steady but kind. "Aisha," he asked softly, "what do you dream of?" The question stunned her. No one had ever asked her that before. Her parents had told her what to do. Society had told her what was expected. But no one, not once, had asked what she wanted. She lowered her gaze, her lips trembling. I don't know." "That's okay," he replied gently. "Dreams take time. When you know, I'll listen." She blinked back tears. He didn't push. He didn't mock her silence. He simply gave her the space to think, to imagine, to exist as herself. And for the first time, Aisha allowed herself to wonder, could there be a future here? It was a small thing, almost accidental, but it changed everything. One afternoon, a glass slipped from Kamal's hand in the kitchen and shattered on the floor. He startled, then looked at Aisha with mock guilt. "Don't tell anyone I'm terrible at house chores," he said in a dramatic whisper. The unexpected humor caught her off guard. A small laugh escaped her lips. Quick, shy, but real. Kamal's eyes lit up. "There it is," he said softly, smiling as though he had just witnessed a miracle. Aisha felt her cheeks burn, but the warmth wasn't unpleasant. For the first time, laughter had entered her new home, and it came from her. That night, as she lay in bed, her thoughts whirled. She remembered the rose in the garden, the steady grip in the market, the sincere compliment at dinner, the gentle question about her dreams, and the laughter in the kitchen. Piece by piece, these moments wove together into something powerful, something undeniable. She was no longer simply enduring. She was beginning to live. Hope flickered inside her, fragile but persistent. She didn't love him yet. She wasn't ready to admit that even to herself, but she couldn't deny that her heart had softened. The walls she had built to protect herself were no longer impenetrable, and for the first time, she didn't fear the cracks. The next morning, Aisha woke earlier than usual. She went to the kitchen, made tea, and placed a cup quietly on the table where Kamal always sat to read. When he entered and saw the cup, his brows lifted slightly. He looked at her, then at the tea, then back at her again. She didn't say anything. She only turned and walked away. But as she left the room, she heard his quiet voice behind her. "Thank you, Aisha." She closed her eyes and let the words settle deep into her heart. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving in this marriage. She was beginning to see its possibilities. She was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this stranger wasn't her enemy. Maybe he was her chance. And so, for the first time since her world had turned upside down, Aisha allowed herself to hold on to something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The change within Aisha did not come like a storm. It was not loud, sudden, or dramatic. It came like the slow melting of ice under the gentle warmth of the sun. Each day brought with it a small shift, a subtle crack in the walls she had built around her heart. For weeks, she had lived behind those walls, silent, cautious, terrified of pain. But Kamal's patience, his quiet kindness, and his refusal to rush her were slowly chiseling away at the fortress she thought was unbreakable. It began with words. Not many, just a few. One evening, as Kamal returned from work, he asked casually, "How was your day?" Before, Aisha would have lowered her gaze, muttered a vague fine, and let the silence swallow her. But this time, something inside her shifted. She looked up, only for a moment, and whispered, "I cooked rice." Kamal paused, surprised by the longer response. Then he smiled. "Did you? I'll have to try it." Her heart skipped. It was such a small exchange, but to her, it felt like climbing a mountain. For the first time, she had let him glimpse her world. Encouraged by that moment, Aisha found herself one evening standing by the window again, watching the moonlight spill over the garden. Kamal entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one on the windowsill near her and sipped from the other. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood beside her, both of them staring at the night sky. Finally, he said softly, "You love the stars, don't you?" Her chest tightened. "Yes," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Why?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then said, "Because they make me feel less alone." Kamal turned his gaze to the sky. "I feel the same." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was comforting. 2 souls, standing side by side, connected not by obligation, but by shared quietness. Days later, something unexpected happened. Aisha found herself speaking about her childhood. They were sitting in the living room. He reading, she sewing a scarf, when she suddenly murmured, "When I was little, I used to hide in the library whenever the house got noisy." Kamal lowered his book, listening intently. She swallowed hard, surprised at herself for sharing something so personal. "I like the smell of books," she continued, her hands trembling slightly. It felt safe. Kamal smiled gently. "That makes sense. Books are like friends that never judge." Her eyes widened. That was exactly how she had always felt, but never put into words. For the first time, she felt truly understood. One evening, while helping arrange some family photos in the living room, Aisha stumbled upon a picture of her parents. They looked so proud, so strict, so unreachable. A lump formed in her throat. She set the frame down quickly, but her hands shook, and before she knew it, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Kamal noticed immediately. "Aisha?" he asked softly, approaching her. She tried to wipe the tears away, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I don't know why." "It's okay," he interrupted gently. "You don't have to hide it." And for the first time in her new life, she broke. She wept openly, her shoulders shaking, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I didn't want this marriage. I wasn't ready. I felt like I had no choice." Kamal listened quietly, his expression filled with empathy. When she finally calmed, he said simply, "You don't need to apologize for your feelings. They're real. They matter." She stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever told her that before. Not her parents, not her relatives. For the first time, she felt her pain had been acknowledged instead of dismissed. That night, as she cried herself to sleep, the tears were not only of sorrow, they were also of release. After that night, something inside Aisha shifted more deeply. She began to trust him, not blindly, but carefully, cautiously, like a bird testing its wings after a long winter. She started asking small questions. "How was your work today?" She started offering small gestures, placing tea beside his chair, folding his scarf neatly. And in return, Kamal continued to show patience. He never demanded more. He never pushed. He simply appreciated what she offered, no matter how small. One evening, he surprised her with a book. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing her a novel wrapped in brown paper. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. It was a book of poetry, soft verses about stars, love, and hope. Her throat tightened. No one had ever given her such a thoughtful gift. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Kamal smiled softly. You don't need to thank me. Just read it when you want. The walls around her heart cracked further one afternoon in the kitchen. She had been helping his sister knead dough when flour accidentally spilled all over her dress. Kamal, passing by, chuckled lightly. You look like a snow queen, he teased. Aisha blinked in shock. Then, against her own expectation, she laughed. A genuine, unrestrained laugh that bubbled out of her chest. The sound filled the kitchen warm and alive. His sister giggled too, and soon the three of them were laughing together. For the first time, Aisha didn't feel like a guest in this house. She felt like part of it. Another evening. Aisha overheard Kamal strumming the guitar softly in his room. The melody was gentle, soothing, filled with unspoken words. She stood quietly by the doorway, listening. When he noticed her, he stopped, embarrassed. No, don't stop, she said quickly, surprised at herself. It's beautiful. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. Sit down. I'll play for you. And so she sat as he played, the music weaving through the air, wrapping around her heart. For the first time, she felt like she belonged not only in his house, but in his world. One night, as they sat under the stars in the garden, Kamal leaned back and sighed. Can I tell you a secret? Aisha nodded cautiously. When my parents arranged this marriage, I was scared too, he confessed. I didn't want to marry a stranger. I didn't know if I could make someone happy. Her eyes widened. She had never considered that he might have felt the same fear. He looked at her with sincerity. But now I think maybe this wasn't such a mistake. Her breath caught. She didn't respond, but inside her heart, something shifted. His honesty touched her more deeply than any act of kindness had before. That night, Aisha lay awake, replaying his words, his music, his gift of poetry, his gentle defense of her silence. Piece by piece, her walls, built from years of fear, resistance, and pain, crumbled. She whispered into the darkness, maybe I can trust him. And in that moment, for the first time since her wedding day, she felt peace. From that day forward, their relationship changed. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comfortable. The words they exchanged were no longer forced. They flowed naturally. She found herself seeking his presence, waiting for his footsteps in the hall, looking forward to their quiet moments together. It wasn't love yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of something strong, something real, something worth holding on to. The walls that once trapped her were gone, and in their place stood a bridge, fragile but steady, connecting her heart to his. And so, in the quiet glow of trust, Aisha took her first steps toward a future she never thought possible. Love does not announce itself with grand fireworks. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, like sunlight slipping through a window at dawn, soft and unnoticed at first, until it fills the entire room with warmth. For Aisha, love arrived in whispers. She didn't realize when her fear turned into trust, and when that trust began blossoming into something deeper. But one morning, she woke up and realized her heart was no longer heavy with dread. Instead, it fluttered at the thought of seeing Kamal. It was a simple morning. She walked into the kitchen to prepare tea, expecting the usual silence. But Kamal was already there, pouring water into the kettle. When he looked up and smiled, her heart skipped. It was not the first time he had smiled at her, but this time, something inside her responded. Her lips curved slightly, her cheeks warmed, and for the first time, she caught herself admiring the steadiness in his eyes. As she poured the tea, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from an unfamiliar excitement. That evening, Kamal suggested a walk in the garden. At first, she hesitated. Old habits of resistance tugged at her. But then, almost without thinking, she agreed. The night was calm, the sky painted with stars. They walked side by side, not touching, not speaking much, but the silence felt alive, as though words weren't necessary. At one point, she stumbled slightly on a loose stone. Kamal's hand shot out instinctively, steadying her. His touch was gentle, not lingering, but her skin burned where his fingers had brushed hers. For the rest of the walk, she felt her heart racing, not from fear, but from something new, something she was too shy to name. A few days later, Kamal left early for work and returned late. The house felt unusually quiet without him. Aisha tried to distract herself, helping his sister, reading the poetry book he had given her, but the silence pressed heavily on her. She realized, to her surprise, that she missed him. She missed his calm presence, his quiet voice, his gentle smiles. When he finally returned late at night, she found herself waiting by the window, pretending she wasn't. As he walked through the door, relief washed over her. He looked tired, but when his eyes met hers, he smiled softly. "You're awake." She nodded quickly, her cheeks warming. She didn't say it out loud, but in her heart, she admitted the truth. "I missed you." One evening, she prepared his favorite dish. She had overheard his sister mention it. When Kamal sat at the table and tasted it, his eyes lit up. "You made this?" he asked, almost surprised. She nodded, lowering her gaze. "It's perfect," he said warmly. "Thank you." Her chest tightened with a sweet ache. She had wanted to make him happy, and she had succeeded. The realization filled her with quiet joy. That night, as they cleared the dishes together, their hands brushed accidentally. This time, she didn't flinch. Instead, she let the moment linger, her heart blooming with warmth. One rainy afternoon, they sat together in the living room. The rain drummed softly against the windows, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Kamal was reading a book, while Aisha embroidered quietly beside him. Without realizing it, she leaned slightly closer, drawn to the comfort of his presence. He didn't move away. Instead, he shifted just enough to let her feel his nearness. She didn't say it, but in her heart, the words echoed loudly. "I feel safe with you." And in that safety, love was quietly taking root. One morning, after days of secretly working on it, Aisha placed a small scarf on Kamal's desk. She had embroidered herself delicate patterns of stars and roses stitched into the fabric. When he found it, he held it gently, his eyes softening. "You made this?" She nodded, nervous. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." Her heart swelled. For the first time, she had given him something of herself, not out of obligation, but out of affection. And in his grateful smile, she saw the reflection of her own growing love. One evening, the family celebrated a small festival by lighting lanterns in the garden. Everyone laughed and cheered as glowing lanterns floated into the sky. Kamal handed one to Aisha. Their fingers brushed as they held it together, lifting it gently. She looked up, watching the lantern rise, glowing against the night. When she glanced at Kamal, his eyes were already on her, not demanding, not pressing, just quietly watching her with a warmth that made her heart race. In that moment, under the starlit sky, she realized she didn't just trust him anymore. She admired him. She cared for him. And though she couldn't bring herself to say the word, she knew, this is love. But love wasn't simple. Aisha struggled with it, wrestled with it. How could she love a man she had once feared? How could her heart change so completely? At night, she whispered into her pillow, "Is it wrong? Is it betrayal to my old self, the one who wanted freedom?" But deep inside, she knew it wasn't wrong. It wasn't forced. It wasn't stolen. It had grown naturally, slowly, like flowers breaking through concrete. And with every passing day, she felt less like a prisoner and more like a woman rediscovering her own heart. One evening, as they shared tea in the garden, she surprised herself by talking, really talking. "I used to hate the sound of weddings," she admitted softly. "Every song felt like a chain tying me down." Kamal listened quietly, his gaze steady. "But now," she hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "Now, when I hear music, I don't feel trapped anymore." His lips curved into a tender smile. "I'm glad." It wasn't a declaration of love, but for Aisha, it was the closest she had ever come to confessing the truth in her heart. That night, lying in bed, Aisha pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart was beating faster than ever, but not from fear. It was love, pure, undeniable love. She whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling but certain. "I love him. The words hung in the air, unspoken to anyone else but finally acknowledged by herself. And with that confession, the last remnants of her fear dissolved. The next morning, when she saw Kamal at the breakfast table, something in her had changed. Her eyes lingered on him longer. Her smile came more easily. Her words flowed more freely. And though she hadn't yet told him, her every action carried the silent message her heart could no longer hide. She loved him. For Aisha, love had once seemed impossible, a distant dream reserved for others. But now, in the home she once feared, with a man she once resisted, love had awakened, quiet, steady, and real, and it was the most beautiful gift she had ever received. Gratitude is a strange thing. It doesn't always arrive in the moments we expect. It comes quietly, after storms have passed, after tears have dried, after the heart has wrestled with itself and finally found peace. For Aisha, gratitude came not as a single flash of light, but as 1,000 tiny sparks that slowly illuminated her soul. She was no longer the frightened girl who had walked into Kamal's home with trembling steps. She was no longer the woman who cried herself to sleep, convinced her dreams had been buried. Something had shifted inside her. Something had bloomed. And it all began with a simple realization. She was happy. One morning, Aisha stood by the window, gazing at the sunlight pouring into the courtyard. She thought about the girl she used to be, the girl who hated the word marriage, who had once whispered prayers begging for escape. Now, as she watched Kamal laughing softly with his younger sister in the garden, she felt her lips curve into a genuine smile. How strange, she thought. I once thought this was the end of my life, but maybe it was the beginning. Yet gratitude was not without its battles. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of night, she still doubted herself. Am I just adjusting? Am I pretending to be happy because I have no choice? These questions haunted her. One evening, she gathered the courage to speak. Kamal, she said hesitantly, her voice trembling, do you ever think maybe this marriage was unfair? That I didn't choose it? Kamal's expression softened. He placed his cup of tea down and looked into her eyes. I've thought about that many times, he admitted gently, and I know I cannot erase the way it happened. But I can spend the rest of my life proving to you that even if it began unfairly, it doesn't have to end that way. Her chest tightened with emotion. His honesty, his humility, his willingness to carry her pain. It broke the last chain of doubt. That night, as she knelt in prayer, her words surprised her. For months, her prayers have been filled with pleas. God, please free me. God, please change my fate. But this time, the words were different. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for giving me someone who listens, someone who cares. Thank you for a stranger who became my home. It was the first time her heart had bowed in gratitude rather than desperation. Gratitude also deepened after a small conflict. One day, Aisha and Kamal disagreed over a household matter. It wasn't a serious fight, but Aisha's old fears returned. She expected shouting anger, maybe even silence for days. Instead, Kamal calmly said, I think we see this differently, but that's okay. Let's talk about it later, when we're calmer. The simplicity of his response stunned her. He didn't use his authority, didn't try to silence her voice. He gave her space, respected her opinion, and treated her as an equal. In that moment, Aisha realized something powerful. She had not only found love, she had found respect, and that respect was the foundation of the gratitude swelling in her heart. A few weeks later, they attended a family gathering. As they sat together, Aisha noticed the way Kamal always made sure she was comfortable, how he filled her plate with food before his own, how he subtly shielded her from uncomfortable questions from nosy relatives. She overheard one aunt whisper, Kamal has changed since his marriage. He looks happier, calmer. Aisha's cheeks warmed. For the first time, she realized she was not only receiving love, but giving it. She was part of his joy, part of his peace. And for that, she was grateful beyond words. One of Aisha's greatest dreams had always been to continue her studies. She had assumed marriage would end that dream forever. But one evening, as she sat with her books, Kamal surprised her. You should apply for the online diploma you were telling me about, he said casually. Her eyes widened. "Do you really think I can?" He smiled. "Of course. Why wouldn't you? I'll help you with the fees." Her throat tightened. It was in that moment she realized she hadn't just gained a husband. She had gained a partner who wanted her to rise, not shrink. Gratitude flooded her soul. She whispered silently to herself, "I thank God for him every day." One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Aisha finally let the words slip out. "Kamal," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I never wanted this marriage. I fought against it. I hated it. But now," her eyes filled with tears, "now I can't imagine my life without you." Kamal's eyes softened. He reached for her hand, not forcefully, not urgently, but gently, asking permission even in his silence. When she didn't pull away, he held her hand and whispered back, "And I can't imagine mine without you." Her heart overflowed. This wasn't a forced bond anymore. This was love. This was gratitude. Aisha often reflected on how much she had changed. She remembered the girl who once looked at Kamal like a stranger and compared her to the woman who now looked at him like a blessing. She realized gratitude had transformed her. It had taken her from fear to faith, from bitterness to beauty. Every time she saw him laugh, every time he supported her dreams, every time he chose kindness over control, she whispered a silent thank you, not only to him, but to life itself. One night, overwhelmed by emotion, Aisha broke down in tears. Kamal panicked, asking, "What's wrong? Did I do something?" Through her sobs, she shook her head. "No, you did everything right. That's why I'm crying. I never thought I could be this happy. I never thought a forced marriage could turn into a gift." Kamal's own eyes grew wet. He wrapped her in his arms, not as a stranger, not as a husband bound by duty, but as the man her heart had chosen to love. From that day forward, Aisha's heart carried gratitude like a treasure. She no longer saw her marriage as a chain, but as a key that had unlocked love, respect, partnership, and peace. Her gratitude was not blind. She still knew her journey had begun painfully, unfairly, but she also knew life had given her something precious through it, a love she might never have found otherwise. And in that realization, she became free. Not free from marriage, but free from fear, free from resentment, free from the wounds of the past. That night, as she lay beside Kamal, she turned to him softly. He was already half asleep, but she whispered anyway, "Thank you for being the stranger I never wanted, but the man I now can't live without." He didn't reply. Sleep had taken him, but a faint smile played on his lips, as if he had heard. And Aisha closed her eyes with peace, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But sometimes, what feels like the end is only a doorway to something greater. For Aisha, what began as the darkest chapter of her life turned into the most beautiful ending she never imagined. Her forced marriage, the chain she once cursed, had become the path to her freedom, her happiness, and her love. And now, as she looked back, her heart overflowed with gratitude, not just for Kamal, but for the journey that had transformed her into a stronger, braver, and more loving woman. One crisp morning, Aisha returned to her parents' home to visit. She stood in the same courtyard where, months earlier, she had cried bitterly upon hearing she would be forced into marriage. Back then, the walls of her family house had felt like a prison, the air thick with sorrow. But now, standing in that same place, her chest felt light. She was not broken anymore. She was whole. Her mother noticed a glow on her face and said softly, "Aisha, you look different, happier." Aisha smiled, tears welling up. "I am, Mama. I really am." It was as if life had brought her back to the very place where her pain began. Only this time, she was standing tall, her heart no longer in chains. Her father, who had once forced her into the marriage for the sake of tradition, asked quietly, "Do you hate us for what we did?" A silence followed, heavy with the weight of truth. Months ago, she would have shouted yes. Months ago, she would have accused them of stealing her freedom. But today, her heart answered differently. "No, Baba," she whispered, her voice steady. "I thought I would hate you forever, but now I understand. You didn't ruin my life. Somehow, you gave me the greatest blessing." Her father's eyes glistened with tears. He had expected anger, maybe resentment, but not forgiveness. And in that moment, the circle of pain closed, replaced by peace. Months passed, and Aisha flourished. With Kamal's support, she continued her studies online. She began to dream again, not small, desperate dreams of escape, but bold dreams of growth and impact. Her family noticed her transformation. She was no longer the quiet, tearful girl they had forced into marriage. She was radiant, confident, glowing with purpose. At family gatherings, relatives whispered, "She looks so happy, who would have thought?" Aisha would smile silently, her heart whispering the answer only she knew, because love changed everything. One evening, Aisha sat with Kamal in the garden, watching the stars. He was telling her a story about his childhood, his laughter filling the air. As she watched him, a thought struck her so deeply it brought tears to her eyes. This man, who was once a stranger, is now my safe place, my best friend, my home. She turned to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Do you know something? I used to pray every night for freedom. I thought my life was over. But now, when I pray, I only thank God for you." Kamal's hand found hers, squeezing it gently. His voice was quiet but firm. "And I thank God for the day you walked into my life." Time has a way of healing wounds when love waters the scars. For Aisha, gratitude had become her daily language. She often told herself, "I was forced into this marriage." But love cannot be forced. Respect cannot be forced. Happiness cannot be forced. These things grew naturally, and that is the miracle of it all. Her story was no longer about suffering. It was about transformation. She wanted the world to know. Sometimes the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest endings. One day, Aisha sat with a younger cousin who was crying, fearing her own arranged marriage. Aisha listened quietly, her heart aching with recognition. Then she took her cousin's hand and said softly, "I used to feel exactly the same. I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything. But sometimes life surprises us. Sometimes what looks like a curse is actually a blessing in disguise." Her cousin wiped her tears, looking at Aisha in wonder. "So you don't regret it?" Aisha smiled through her own tears. "Not anymore, because through that pain, I found the love of my life." And in that moment, her story became more than her own. It became a beacon for others who felt trapped, hopeless, or broken. As months turned into years, Aisha and Kamal built a life together filled with respect, laughter, and love. They were not perfect. They still disagreed, still faced challenges. But every time, they chose understanding over anger, patience over pride. And each trial only deepened their bond. One evening, as they discussed future plans, Kamal asked, "What do you want most in life?" Aisha thought carefully before replying, "I want us to always stay like this. Not perfect, not without problems, but together with love, with respect." Kamal smiled, nodding. "Then that is what we'll fight for every day." Her heart swelled with gratitude. She realized the true beauty of love was not in perfection, but in two imperfect souls choosing each other again and again. Years later, when Aisha looked back on her life, she often thought of that frightened girl she used to be. If she could speak to her younger self, she would say, "Don't be afraid. What feels like the end of your dreams may be the doorway to something greater. Hold on. Life has a way of surprising you." Her journey had taught her the deepest truth of all. Sometimes the path we resist the most is the one that carries us to our destiny. And so, the story of a girl forced into marriage did not end with tragedy. It ended with love. It ended with respect. It ended with gratitude. Aisha's forced marriage to a stranger became the very reason she found her greatest blessing. Her heart, once broken, was now whole. Her spirit, once caged, was now free. Her life, once feared, was now cherished. And in the quiet of every night, when she whispered her final prayers, her words were always the same. "Thank you for turning my darkest day into my most beautiful ending."